Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unlocking a massive biological mystery. Why exactly do we look the way we do? We are going to dive deep into the mechanics of heredity, figure out the scientific rules for how traits are passed down across generations, and decode the incredible information source hidden right there inside our very own cells. Let's get into it.
Think about your own family for a second. Do you look exactly like your parents? You probably share the same basic human design and broad features with them, but subtle differences are everywhere, right? This is actually the foundational rule of reproduction. It creates individuals of a similar design, absolutely, but it also generates continuous, endless variation. And that brings us to our very first clue. Check out these two photos. We're looking at free earlobes versus attached earlobes. It's a tiny, kind of random detail, but it's a brilliant visual clue. The lowest part of the ear is closely attached to the side of the head in some of us, but totally free in others. Just by observing who has which earlobe type in a family tree, we can actually start tracking the invisible rules of inheritance in real time.
Section 1. Mendel's Rules of Inheritance. To really grasp how these variations pass down, we have to talk about Gregor Mendel. While other people had definitely observed inheritance before, Mendel was different. He brilliantly blended biology with math. By meticulously growing and counting garden peas in his monastery, he became the very first person to keep an exact mathematical tally of traits in every single generation. He used highly visible characters, like whether a seed was round or wrinkled, or if a plant was tall or short, to completely uncover the invisible rules of heredity.
Picture this. Mendel breeds a tall pea plant with a short pea plant. What do you think happens in the first generation, the F1 progeny? You'd probably expect nature to just mix them together like paint and make a medium-height plant, right? Well, nope. There were no medium plants at all. Every single one of the offspring was perfectly tall. This was a huge deal because it meant only one of the parental traits was actually visible. There were absolutely no halfway characteristics.
So the crucial takeaway here is that some traits, like tallness in these peas, are what we call dominant. They're a bit bossy and they visibly overpower other traits. The trait that gets hidden away in the background, like shortness in this case, is called a recessive trait. To actually be a short plant, it has to inherit two exact copies of that recessive short factor. But to be tall, just a single copy of that dominant tall factor is enough to completely mask the short one.
Section 2. Combining multiple traits.
Okay, so what happens when we complicate things and mix plants with two different characteristics? Say, breeding a tall plant that has round seeds with a short plant that has wrinkled seeds. Well, in the first generation, just like before, they were all tall with round seeds, the dominant traits. But here is the crazy twist. When those offspring self-pollinated to create a second generation, the F2 generation, Mendel didn't just get those original parent combos back. He got brand new combinations. Suddenly, he's looking at tall plants with wrinkled seeds and short plants with round seeds. The math on this is honestly mind-blowing. When Mendel counted them all up, out of 556 seeds, he found a distinct, super-specific pattern. 315 were round yellow, 108 were round green, 101 were wrinkled yellow, and 32 were wrinkled green. If you break that down, it is a perfect 9:3 to 3:1 ratio. This essentially proved that seed shape and seed color are inherited completely independently of each other. The factor controlling tallness literally doesn't care what the factor controlling seed shape is doing. They mix and match freely. And that's exactly why offspring can have such a vast, totally unique combination of traits.
Section 3. How genes control traits.
We've got the macro rules down now, but how do these abstract mathematical factors that Mendel counted actually build a physical trait? Like, how does a factor physically build the height of a pea plant or the shape of a human earlobe? Well, today, we know Mendel's factors by a much more familiar name, genes. Cellular DNA is the ultimate information source for making proteins in our cells. A gene is really just a specific section of that DNA that acts as the blueprint for one particular protein.
And this brilliantly illustrates the biological chain of command. Let's look at plant height again as our example. The plant has a gene, and that gene acts as a blueprint for an enzyme. If that gene is the dominant, highly efficient version, the enzyme works perfectly and pumps out a massive amount of growth hormone, giving us a tall plant. But if the gene has an alteration making it less efficient, well, less hormone is produced and the plant stays short. It's a perfect sequence. The gene dictates the protein dictates the hormone, and the hormone builds the trait.
Now, because every sexually reproducing organism gets one set of genetic instructions from each parent, the offspring ends up with two copies of every single gene. So how doesn't this just multiply out of control? Well, our DNA isn't just one long, messy thread. It's neatly broken up into separate pieces called chromosomes. During reproduction, special germ cells take exactly one chromosome from each pair. Then, when fertilization happens, those two single sets combine, beautifully restoring the normal paired number. It's this elegant biological dance that keeps the species' DNA stable, while still constantly allowing for all those new independent trait combinations we just talked about.
Section 4. Human sex determination.
We know how physical traits are shuffled, but how does biology decide if an individual is going to be male or female? In the animal kingdom, it's not always genetic, which is wild to think about. For some reptiles, the literal temperature that their eggs are incubated at decides if the hatchlings will be male or female. And in other animals, like certain types of snails, they can even change their sex based on environmental cues. But for us humans, it's a different story. Human sex is strictly genetically determined by the chromosomes we inherit directly from our parents.
To put that into perspective, humans have 22 perfectly matched pairs of chromosomes, getting a maternal and paternal copy for each. But that 23rd pair, that is the rule breaker. Those are the sex chromosomes. Women carry a perfect pair of sex chromosomes, which we call XX. Men, on the other hand, carry a mismatched pair. They have one normal-sized X chromosome and one very short one called the Y chromosome, making them XY.
So, what does this actually mean in practice? It means that all children, whether they are boys or girls, will always inherit an X chromosome from their mother. The biological sex of the child is entirely determined by what they inherit from their father. Because of this genetic coin toss by the father's germ cells, there is a perfect 50% chance for the child to inherit the Y chromosome and be a boy, or inherit the X chromosome and be a girl.
Section 5. The survival value of variation. So, zooming out for a second, why does this constant mixing, matching, and generating of tiny little differences matter so much for the survival of an entire species? Why aren't we all just identical? Well, it absolutely comes down to adaptation. Imagine a massive population of bacteria. If they were all perfectly identical clones, a sudden, intense heat wave could literally wipe out the entire population in one fell swoop. But because of subtle, inherited genetic variations, a few of those bacteria might naturally have a slightly higher heat resistance. Those few survive the heat wave, multiply, and pass on that winning trait. The variation itself is quite literally what saved the species from going extinct.
And that leaves us with a pretty fascinating final thought as we wrap up this explainer. The selection of variants by environmental factors forms the absolute basis of evolution. So, as our own world's environment continues to drastically shift and change around us right now, which hidden genetic variations within humanity today will evolutionary processes select as the key to our future survival? Thank you so much for exploring the mechanics of heredity with me, and definitely keep questioning the incredible science hiding right inside your own cells.